Hello everyone, today we are taking a look at the Mobula 8 with the DJI O3.
Uh-oh, something's rubbing.
Yeah, this has been kind of around for a while, but it's now final. You might remember the previous iteration. This is one that you have to add your O3 to. It will not ship with an O3. So when you see a price that's lower than expected, don't be surprised by that. You have to add your DJI O3 to this. But this is the final version, and of course we are going to put it through its paces, as I typically do on this channel. I'm not going to cover everything because most of the hardware is the same as we've seen in previous videos for the WalkSnail version, the HDzero version. The difference is the analog version has a built-in VTX. But if you want to see that full detailed review as well as batteries that do and don't fit into the battery tray, of course you can DIY whatever you want. I'll put a link to my original video down in the video description. You can watch that if you want to. The Mobula 8 with the DJI O3 weighs 83 grams. I use mainly these three batteries, so let's weigh them with the quad. With the red labeled G&B 552S, it comes into a little over 111.5 grams. The green label actually comes in a little bit heavier than that red label, and I'm not terribly surprised by that because I thought the performance on this was on par. There's going to be some battery weight variation within the same battery. And with the 530, it weighs under 110 grams, just a touch. And motor post to motor post, I'm getting just about 87 3/4 millimeters. Okay, so I hope you got your coffee. Yes, it says aircraft processor overheated, but I'm gonna take off anyways. Terrible hot this past week to 10 days. We had consistent temperatures over 96 degrees, and from time to time we would have temperatures of 101 to 103. And then, of course, you have the heat index calculated with that, and we were having a little bit of a heat wave, a little bit of an early summer heat wave. As this was in June and it just turned over to July just now. A little sad news about that tree I've been liking to fly around. We had a big storm come through, 80-mile-an-hour winds, kind of almost like in a microburst. I don't know if that's the proper term for it or not, but that little tree is quite a bit smaller. Actually spent the most of the afternoon out working on that tree. So unfortunately that branch that's kind of hanging out horizontally over the fence, that is coming down. I don't have it all down yet, but I have a majority of the weight off. I don't have a chainsaw, or at one point I bought one, but I think I loaned it out and never got it back. So I was out there with a sawzall that I do have the high tooth blade for cutting down tree branches, but of course there's a limit to how much time I'm going to spend cutting down with a sawzall and a high tooth blade. But I wanted to start out with the faster stuff. Of course, this isn't how I started out when I got it. You know, I started out with the smooth flying, the slow, cinematic sort of flying. But about as quickly as I could, I moved on to my more favorite sort of style, which is to just go out and have fun. It's a little bit of a racing style, a little bit of a flippy-floppy style. I guess you'd call that freestyle or just fun style, whatever sort of fun you want. And I do think that if it comes down to you wanting to fly the highest visual FPV experience that we have with the DJI O3, and you want a micro that has the capabilities that you see on screen, this is the one to get. There's no way the Pico is going to do this. I do plan to come back with a little bit of a Pico Mobula 8 O3 comparison, but don't expect it to be with this sort of flight style. I'm going to try to do what I can do with it as far as the Pavo Pico, but I don't think it's going to compare anywhere near to this. The Pavo Pico is really designed around that slow, smooth, cinematic sort of flight style, whereas this one is much more capable of flying more aggressively. Punch outs, various things that you've seen as I go through this video. And yes, up next will be the inside flight as well. As we get down to the end of the battery here, I did find that you do need to, with the voltage requirements, kind of leave the battery warning voltage at almost stock. You could probably lower it by a couple notches, but I felt, because of one of the experiences that I had, that leaving the annoying low battery on screen was better than running it so low that the O3 powered off, because I did have that happen in a previous review as well as this review. Okay, the flight has ended. I am flying the red labeled G&B 550 in this particular flight, and we did get almost 3 minutes of flying time, which is pretty normal. And now we're going to move on to one of my more favorite sorts of flying, which is inside. I like to fly inside, the comfort of the home. I can avoid the high heat, the sunburn, and sit in a nice cushioned chair and fly it around. Now, I'm not exactly going plaid. You got to keep in mind we have to manage the weight and the power that something like this has. With 2-inch props and weighing, what was it, 88 grams dry and 111 with batteries, you know, that's a fair bit of weight, but I did get a couple of requests from people wanting me to give it a go, as I tried to do. I did do speed runs, which you saw a clip of that in the very beginning, and that oftentimes is kind of a durability test as well as a fun test for me, or just trying to push my ability to control quads and continue to push them harder and harder throughout the house. I did have a bunch of crashes. I'll put together a little bit of a crash reel when we get back to the desk, kind of do a picture-in-picture thing. I did break the frame in 2 different places, which all the breakages came when I was flying inside doing those speed runs. So if you have the skill set that can do speed runs without crashing like I crash and what I'll try to show you, you'll be fine. But in my previous review with the Mobula 8, I also broke the frame there. I hit one of the pergola posts just kind of dead on. So especially when you get into the HD weights of these things, these plastics on our hoops do not hold up. So that's something you have to be prepared for. I think these frames, I should have looked it up before I started recording the video. I thought they were $12 or less. 12 and 8 were the numbers sticking in my mind for the Mobula 8 frame. It may be because of the Mobula 8 name. Yes, that is our middle daughter. She had just gotten back from debate camp, and she is catching up on all the entertainment that she had missed out on while she was doing the debate camp. She said that was pretty intense. It was good. It was fun. She learned a lot, and she's looking forward to the coming season. So she's being patient over there, and actually, some of you might say kind of jaded. She's not even bothered by me whizzing around with this, what is pretty loud. I have toned it down for the inside flying so that you can hear my narration. So I turned the volume down. So don't think it's this quiet when you fly it around. That's why I left the intro flight and no talking and full volume in that, so you could get a good idea of what the sound was like when flying inside. So don't get confused about the sound now versus the sound then. I intentionally turned it down now so that we could do the narration without having to speak real loud or do a bunch of audio trickery in order to make it usable, because that is some feedback that I do get from time to time flying inside, is that it's too loud and they can't hear me, or it's just too loud overall. So this flight is going to be coming in here for an ending at not too long here, but of course you've got to manage that low battery because the the DJI O3 has a voltage requirement, and if you go below, 3.2 volts? No, it's not 3.2. It's you can't get below 7 point something. Oh, I forget. Our battery's in good shape. We got 2 minutes and 49 seconds. Staying with the inside theme, this is just going to be a short sample so that you can see what it's like inside. Again, I have lowered the audio volume down so that we're not having to yell or scream, or you're not having your ears blown out. I spent 2 days flying inside, and I think I lost most of the recordings from my first day, so I had to get my hex driver out and lower the camera angle back down in order to be able to get the inside slow flying, because I'd actually done the outside slow flying. There were 3 different days I did some testing on the outside slow flying. I'll talk about that more when we get to it. But then when I came inside, I was getting ready to do the flying around inside. And that's when that evening or something like that, I had reviewed the footage and I was missing a bunch of footage. I don't know if I just misplaced it, if I forgot to record. I know there was one flight that I missed because I had a crash and the battery ejected and the recording was just gone. That was one I actually was really looking forward to including in the video because it was a pretty dramatic crash. I ran smack dab into the wall. I was talking to my son while I was flying. He had just come home from taking our youngest to tennis. Anywho, this is just, again, a sample so that you can see it in a more slow fashion, so you can study the video quality. Of course, with the camera angle down so low, you can see the hoops down at the very, very bottom, so you may have to turn your camera angle up in order to be able to, or crop in order to get the hoops out of view if you use a very low camera angle. I would say this is about 5 to 8 degrees on the camera angle that I'm currently running at on this particular flight. So I want to give you some idea if you're looking at it from a slow, smooth, cruisy sort of cinematic flying. what the video quality would be like in a bunch of different lighting environments. You know, we've got natural sun coming through the windows. We've got LED lighting. We've got typical household lighting. I just wanted to give you a sample of that. Of course, our flight time, I had actually had an issue with this battery, so I ended up using this particular battery to do the slow flying. So the slow flight in general, we'll get a much better idea of how long it goes, which is about 3.5 to 4 minutes, depending upon how slow you're flying and how much wind you're flying it against when you're doing it outside. Let's move on to that outside flight. Okay, still hot. We've got in red, the aircraft processor overheated. Yeah, it's 100 degrees. This is about 6:30 in the evening. Reported wind data is 8 miles an hour. Oddly enough, when I got done with this particular evening of flying, I looked at the weather for the next day, and it said it was going to be 5-mile-an-hour winds. The next day, I'm like gung-ho. I get up extra early to go for an early morning flight before I head into work, and it's windier than it is on this day. So I look back at the weather, and it still says 5 miles an hour. But it did say gusts up to 15 miles an hour. So maybe the gusts were just long, and I was catching them just right when I was standing out there. I was like, there's no way. I went ahead and flew, but it was ridiculous. It's not the kind of flying, or it's not the kind of environment with the wind that you would want to fly a whoop slow and smooth. But this is our slow, smooth sample so that you can get an idea of the cinematic style and how stable the video is. It isn't perfect, but of course, when I compare it to what I saw previously with the printed version, it is vastly improved. But I think this is much improved, but it's not dead still. Unfortunately, in my environment, getting a dead still wind day is really, really rare. Some of you may have heard me mention it, maybe it was 2 weeks ago. I had like a string of 3 days where the wind was 3 to 5 miles an hour, which in the backyard, you really couldn't even feel the wind, and the wind gusts were just unnoticeable. That would have been ideal weather, but at that time I didn't have this final version of the Mobula 8 DJI O3 version, so unfortunately that doesn't apply here, but it sure would have been nice to get some 3 to 5 mile an hour winds with minimal gusts to do some more flying so that I could do a comparison. I already mentioned it in the video that you'll want probably a comparison between this and the Pavo Pico. I will come back and do that. I want to give them both an even shot on the same day. I think that's critically important, is to fly them on the same day within a few minutes of one another. Especially for those that may be considering this in some sort of, cinematic nature. The Mobula 8 with the DJI O3 is going to be your ripper, and we want to see, video stabilized comparison between those two on the same exact day is just going to be the best way. I focused my flying on the Mobula 8 during the last 10 days that I've had the final version, or maybe it was only 8 days. So I've really focused on just flying this one. Obviously, I have a lot of flight footage, and this can make it for a very long video, but you're always in control with that scroll bar and your mouse. You can click away or your finger to wherever you want to see. Hopefully, I remember to put in some chapters. I try to remember to do that for longer videos, but I don't always recall that. Okay, so I took a quick peek and went forward. This flight goes for 3 minutes and 47 seconds, and I do fly the battery a touch slow. So to give you some idea about the flight time on this particular day, on this particular environment, with the high heat and the supposed 8 mile an hour winds with a gust that could be potentially up to 11 miles an hour. That's according to the weather app, and I do use 2 different weather apps to kind of do a comparison. But of course, when it comes to whoops and cinematic flying, less wind is always better. All right, let's go back to the desk. Let's do the damage report, the crash reel, and some final thoughts. Okay, so I mentioned that I broke the frame. Yep, broke it right over here. Inside flights is where I broke it, and one of these this spur right here is broken. So I had those 2 breakages over across, what would it be? Somewhere around 40 flights, I think, 40 to 50 flights. Not all of them inside, of course. I think I had approximately 22 to 26 inside flights. That's where my breakages resulted. You can see some of my props are kind of turned in. They're a little bit dirty, and that crash reel should be playing over there. Of course, sound, I think, well, for me, sound on the crash is always more fun, and sometimes I try to play those in the very beginning of videos because I laugh sometimes when I crash because I do something silly, so maybe something I'm not ready for, or I just make a silly mistake, and so I laugh, and I think that brings a little joy to, and a little element of fun to the video that isn't so, about the facts. So anyways, Good thing about all my crashes and the fact that the O3 is fine. Of course, you know, you're highly exposed up here with this O3 mounted on top, as is the case with this and any other micro. So if you go headlong, I hear these lenses break fairly easily. So if you go in and hit the lens, we've got camera protection built in here. I don't know how robust it is. I haven't broken any of these yet. I've read about other people breaking them, but not me yet. So I can't really confirm or deny anything that might be going on there. Of course, we are just using the one screw. You can change that screw mount to the secondary hole if you want to try to get any of the prop protection out of view. Moving the camera up would help keep that out. Of course, this was about the angle I was using on the faster flights for inside and outside. So close. I think I had it a touch taller, but one of my crashes kind of moved it down a little bit, and I didn't adjust it back. So something else to note on this is that, you know, I built this one slightly different. So I went screw down, and this time I went screw up, and then securing these screws, making them fairly tight. You know, we don't want to get Hulk-handed on them, but making them fairly tight was kind of a struggle because there isn't a screw slot, so to speak, that'll hold the screw still. What I found worked. By the way, I use Welder to fix my Whoop frames, and I always put a link to this to Amazon down in the video description of all the videos. I buy it by a 2-pack. And I will probably, when I do my comparison, just put some welder on this frame. So when you see this one with the Pavo Pico, you see it with a little bit of welder. E6000 also works. Hot glue does not work. Stay away from things like crazy glue because they really harden up and then it'll snap again, either in the same location, very close to the same location. So you end up with a bunch of micro breaks, or it'll just break again somewhere else. Welder and E6000, they stay flexible, which is nice, and why I approve of using it. Back to the screw. So I'd take my little pointer, and it's kind of an operation here, but I would jab one side of this into the square side of the screw while I had my hex on the other side, and then I could get that to kind of hold its position while I turned it ever so slightly, trying to get it. I wanted to get it tight. I wanted to get it snug. I wanted to make sure it was bolted down to the frame good and solid, and I didn't have any sort of movement, which I think I did achieve by using that technique. A screwdriver, a little tiny screwdriver that they include in the kit, may possibly work. I didn't try that. I just reached for this first because I knew it was, you know, has a variable tip. You know, the further down you go, the thicker it gets. So I thought this was a real good starting point. That's what I used. I don't know where you can buy these, probably all over the place. I couldn't even tell you where I got mine. And you can see we've got an abrasion up here. One thing I would like, and I think I'm asking for something that isn't very viable because I think it's going to break off, is some sort of antenna protection or support so that these don't get beat down so much. Just like almost like a little tube that they lay into, like a half tube. What would that be called? Like a half tube. That's the best way I can describe it. That just sticks out here 4 or 5 millimeters to help support the antennas. One of my concerns with flying faster was that, you know, this gets in here and then gets all chopped up. Well, that's bad. I don't want that to happen because it's a complete pain. You got to take all the screws out to get to the O3, and you got to take out 2 O3 screws to replace the antenna. So just a little bit of support, even if you're not using antennas like this. Just, you know, 4 or 5 millimeters off the back end of this, a half tube on each side for each antenna, I think would be a good thing. Let me know what your thoughts are. Is it adequate the way it is? Are you not? Do I have a concern that you don't have a concern of, or are you looking for some different sort of support altogether? That's possible. The USB port is something else that we got to talk about. That is a pain in the patoot to get to. If you don't want to take your screws out so that you can get to the actual O3 air unit. Let me show you what I ended up doing. Okay, so it looks like a normal USB-C, right? Well, I shaved this sucker down. I used my Dremel and shaved it down quite a bit. I could get it in there without, or before I'd shaved it down, but it did not give me a whole lot of confidence that doing that a bunch of times with the standard size USB cable was going to keep the port intact and not move it around a little bit every time you plugged in and took it out. By the way, all the video footage I showed you was goggle DVR footage. It was not from the VTX. That should have been obvious, but if you're not familiar with this, the goggle footage for the O3 units. You can only get the beta flight information, which I think is critical for reviews. You can get clean video without the beta flight OSD information right off the VTX. Of course, that is, I believe, a 4K recording as well. So it's unblemished as far as anything being printed on screen. You just plug in USB to get to it. But with this shaved down, and you can see it's pretty extreme what I've done here. This goes in much easier and gives me a lot more confidence that I'm not going to be doing any damage to the O3 port when I'm plugging and unplugging this particular USB cable. So I would like to see them include in the kit kind of one of those right angle adapters where you have the naked USB-C that would be long enough to get out past this extended mount out here, so that you wouldn't have to do what I had to do with your USB-C connectors, which is to shave them down in order to get your video footage off of here. Otherwise, you've got to unscrew, you've got to take that thing out, or lower it at the very least in order to get your USB cable in underneath, in order to get that unblemished 4K recording right off of the O3 unit. Okay, some final thoughts on the Mobula 8 DJI. I think I said it earlier in the video, if you're wanting something that's less than a 3-inch prop, so micro, and you're wanting to enjoy the highest visual experience you can have, it's with the DJI O3 and FPV. This is the one to get as of right now. When it comes to flying around, especially if it comes to flying around more commonly, whether it's a smooth sort of cruisy freestyle that you might do or exploratory, or if you like to do some hardcore racing, when it comes down to having an O3 on a micro, this is the one to have, because quite honestly, there's not much on the market. And I'm not terribly surprised on that, because I think it's challenging to do this and to do it very well as have the confidence of your customer base, knowing that your $239 O3 unit is sitting on top of this quad and it's highly exposed to damage. There's just no way around that with micros. So that's a risky business market to go into, so to speak. But if you're wanting an O3, and you're wanting that visual experience of an O3, and you're wanting a micro, and you're wanting to do anything other than slow, cruisy flight, I think this is the one to have. And even if you're wanting to do slow, cruisy flight, this is the one to have. And we may see that the video stabilization on the Mobula 8 O3 is just as good as it is in the Pavo Pico, because remember, as I said, I am going to come back with a side-by-side review of these particular ones doing a slow, steady flight. I know the Pavo Pico isn't going to do aggressive flight very well. Racing style, faster exploratory style, it is going to be slow only, and I'm not going to try to fly that thing aggressively inside, because I'm going to end up breaking an O3 just trying, I bet. I don't have any confidence in my own skill set and try to take the Pavo Pico and race around the house. I'm just going to shred the thing. I just know it. But yeah, I think if you're wanting the O3 in a micro, at least this size of micro, this form factor, this is the one to have. And they should be available finally for you to order and for Happy Model to ship, or whatever reseller that you find that they have them. I'll look around the internet to see where I can find resellers that have the Mobula 8 in the, at least a listing for the Mobula 8 the O3 version, and I'll put that down in the video description. You can use that if you'd like, or you can just go to your favorite FPV shop and see if they have that in stock yourself. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comments section below. I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching.